How many of us have ever felt scattered brained in our lives, where your mind feels like a bouncy ball bouncing from places to places and not stopping? Or felt the opposite, where your mind feels like a glue trap and you can only focus on one thing and nothing else? We have all experienced this at least once in our lives, and we can say the least that it's not fun. Well, this is a very basic description of what ADHD feels like. And while it is a very basic description, it is not the full extent of having ADHD. In June of 2022, the American Psychiatrists Association describes ADHD as a chronic and debilitating disorder that affects its patients on a daily basis, with it affecting their personal and academic achievements, their relationships, and their daily tasks. And while most people do see ADHD as just having a hard time paying attention, it is much more than that. In this speech, I will talk about 3 points. The first point will be about the myths and misinformation surrounding ADHD and the truth behind it. The second will be what ADHD really is and what falls underneath the category of it. And third, I will talk about what a person with ADHD will experience. And now with that, let's get on to the myth. With every disorder that has ever been named and discovered, there will always be misinformation and myths about it, due to many reasons behind them. And ADHD is no exception. The biggest myth about ADHD is that it's not a real disorder, and this is caused by how people perceive ADHD, as people just see it as having a hard time paying attention, being energetic, or just lazy. And while these might be a few examples of their symptoms, there are many more aspects to ADHD along with its symptoms. The second biggest myth about ADHD is that it is only a childhood disorder. And while most people who have been diagnosed with ADHD were diagnosed as children, this does not mean that this disorder will go away when they reach adulthood. And there are still many people who have been diagnosed with ADHD as teenagers and adults. And the third biggest myth about ADHD is that it only happens more in boys rather than girls. And while this may be a bit true with girls having a lower rate in ADHD than boys, it is not because they are less likely to have it. It is more that they are less likely to be diagnosed than boys. In this graph, this shows that boys throughout the years have had a higher rate of being diagnosed with ADHD than girls, even though they have a rate of having ADHD just much lower. And now with the myths out of the way, you're probably wondering, well, what ADHD really is. ADHD stands for Attention Deficit / Hyperactivity Disorder. And according to the American Psychiatrists Association, they say that ADHD is the most common type of disorder found in children, with there being an 8.4% happening in children and a 2.5% of being found in adults. And while there are many symptoms that we do know of ADHD, such as being energetic, excessive daydreaming, and fidgeting, there are still different types of disorders and symptoms in different types of people. For example, adult symptoms may vary from frequent mood swings and low frustration tolerance and not being able to do multiple tasks at once. There's also 3 different types of ADHD. The first type being inattentive ADHD, which focuses more on the mental symptoms of having ADHD. Those who do have this type would experience the symptoms of excessive daydreaming, forgetful memory, and not being able to do tasks one at a time. With people who do have this type of ADHD, this only affects 31% of people who have been diagnosed. The second type of ADHD is hyperactivity/impulse type, which this type focuses more on the physical symptoms rather than the mental. The symptoms can be that they are far more energetic, they are more likely to fidget, and they are more likely to act on impulse. This is the least type of common ADHD, with only 7% having it. And the third type of ADHD is combined ADHD, which combines the symptoms of both inattentive and hyper/impulse ADHD, which this being the more common type of ADHD found in people with a 62% of having it. And while having information of ADHD is very useful, experiencing ADHD is far different. In an academic journal of medical students with ADHD experiencing it, they do talk about what they experience. And while most of us aren't medical students, a lot of us and all of us are in college or university, so we know a little bit of what they're talking about. Most say that they do not feel they have support in their school with having ADHD due to their resources and adjustments being very limited to just one type of ADHD. And most of them also describe of being bullied by both peers and professors at the school, with one girl recalling crying after class after her professor told her she shouldn't become a doctor due to her ADHD. And another thing is that people who do have ADHD or been diagnosed are most likely to also be diagnosed with some other disorders, such as anxiety, sleep disorders, Tourette's syndrome, or being on the spectrum. And while there are slight negatives to having ADHD, there are ways that you can treat it or make it more manageable. And while people who have been diagnosed with ADHD, they also state that they also felt relief after being diagnosed because they know there are treatments that they can be using. And there are different types of treatments. Some people may use medications when they feel like their ADHD is far severe than other types without using other treatments. Some people also use counseling and therapy to find ways to manage their ADHD in their own ways, and some people do activities to help with their excessive energy, with some people doing exercises to help with their mind and energy, and some people using fidget toys to help with stimulation. And while there were many points to this speech of having ADHD, with the myths surrounding it and painting a bad picture of ADHD, what ADHD really means and the different types of it and symptoms, what people will experience with ADHD, and the treatments they can use, singular or with combined usage. Just like with any other disorder, ADHD is never going to be as simple as just having too much energy and not being able to pay attention. There are multiple layers to having ADHD and the information to it. And hopefully with this speech, you found a little bit more information of what really is ADHD.